This complex here was the superintendent's residence for hundreds of years. It was a group of homes that eventually one roof was built over. You had several deacon homes connected. There were 2 or 3 deacons' homes. Karlstadt lived in one on the other side. Right here you have Caspar Lescher noted on, he is the father of Valentin Ernst Lescher. Caspar Lescher was superintendent in the 1680s, 90s or so, when the Wittenberg faculty very definitively rejected pietism.
This place is the Bugenhagen house, the pastoral personage of Johann Bugenhagen. He was born in Treptow an der Rega, that is in the northeast of Germany. Now it belongs to Poland, and Beichtvater, the confessor of Martin Luther, and he turned around through Germany to establish new church orders. And so you can imagine he was not often inside.
He also preached such long sermons, Luther wondered if he wasn't nailed into the pulpit. In 1547, in Pentecost season, there was a group of horsemen that rode up, probably, I would assume probably on the other side of the Kirchhof here. This is a cemetery. They rode up the other side or this side, and they knocked on his door. And his wife ran up and got her husband Bugenhagen, and who was standing at the door but Emperor Charles V himself with his retinue. They had defeated John Frederick south of town at the Battle of Milberg, where the imperial forces with about 20,000 were able to find a place to cross the river. They unhooked some pontoon boats, made a bridge, rushed the evangelicals, chased them. They were having mass, by the way, the evangelicals, the Lutherans, chased them 10 miles north to a large field, and 5,000 soldiers were slaughtered by the imperial forces as they tried to escape through a narrow path out of that field. There are several Cranach children buried right here. And also Melanchthon as a child buried quite close to what was a wall there. Cranach children here. Well, this is the old Latin school. Education prior to the Reformation, as many of you know much better than I, it was geared largely toward providing choir boys and future church workers. It was broadened, of course, after the period of humanism and the Reformation. Philip Melanchthon becomes the preceptor of Germany. He lays out a precise and ordered curriculum for the schools. Paul Eber, who was the superintendent when this school was built in 1564, it was finished in 67. If you read it says Proverbs 2, learn my son wisdom, etc. And then Colossians 2, in Christ are all the treasures of wisdom and understanding. And it says in the year of our Lord 1564, in the month of July, the building of this school in Kepta Est was begun, at which time the most illustrious August, Prince of Saxony, elector of the Holy Roman Emperor, etc., Regebat, ruled this land. And by his magnificence, this edification assisted in the edification of this building, etc. It says the pastor at the time was Paul Ebert, and the mayor at the time Burgermeister was Thomas Heilinger. 1826-27, they added the 4th floor and again added some lecture space as the needs for the school were growing. Please go on in.
This chapel will become the heart of this house. I hope and I guess that will be. And it's very meaningful that the students and the visitors have a place for worshiping here and for celebrating Lord's Supper. And at the entrance you had seen the baptismal font. There is flowing water inside. Jesus Christ taught us He is the water of life. And when your view is going here in front, You can see the bow. I had spoken about about that this morning. The table is bowing down. That is so impressive to me.
We were able to purchase a wonderful organ. Ulrich, you tell us about the organ. You know the most about it, I think.
The sound of this organ in this room, if people are singing as wonderfully as all of you are singing in the service, then you will still hear the organ.
A mighty fortress is our God, a trusty shield and weapon. He helps us free from every need that hath us now o'ertaken.
When you watch these memorials from front, you can see the typical Luther with the Holy Scripture in his hand. And Luther was a national hero, and he should affirm the German nation. And Matt is telling you why we turn you in the back of this memorial.
Yes, I mentioned this earlier. This says it was established by the Mansfeld Verein for Luther's memorial. And then it says errichtet by King Frederick Wilhelm III. So he came literally after the consummating the Prussian Union. He came down here and solemnly dedicated a statue to Luther. What Zasa notes and others is that prior to the Prussians and the Prussian Union, there were very little statues, maybe no statues made of Luther. So Hermann Zasa used to say, beware Reformation anniversaries. The worst things in the history of Lutheranism happen on anniversaries. You should also know at the time of Luther, most of these were just small wooden thatched homes. This whole row right here, for instance, in front of the church at Luther's time, was originally just small thatched homes. By the end of Luther's life, of course, some of these larger homes had started to be erected. You know, this is where the trial of Peter Beskendorf took place, no doubt. Peter Master Barber. And just a couple more things. This house is 19th century on the corner, but that's where Johann Heuselmann lived, the great Orthodox, 17th century Orthodox Lutheran opponent of Calixte. This is the place where Johann Quenstedt lived, in the house with the big gable. Because of all Luther's publications, there were at one time about 1,600, as many as 27 publishers, and all, of course, the accompanying businesses of paper makers. 27. Okay. This monument to Melchthon was on the anniversary of his 300th death. It was established in 1860. The first reference to the Rathaus, so the council building, is in 1317. That earlier Rathaus was smaller than this, and it was in 1521 or 22 that it was replaced by this building. So this building is contemporary for much of Luther's life here. This portico was built in the 1570s, so it was after Luther. This was the place where capital punishment took place, right, in this area. It was the market forever. This is called Wittenberg because this was the white hill up from the Elbe, right here. It was an ancient place for the markets on the roads from Magdeburg to Dresden.
This place, you can call it the Photoshop of the Reformation. That's why that is the Cranach Courtyard, the house of Lucas Cranach, and Duke Frederick the Wise called him in 1505 as a famous painter to live here and to work here, and this is the place where Lucas Cranach the older or the senior live and work.
He was a dear friend of Luther's. He was very close to John Frederick, the prince who was captured. This is a memorial in 1556. Some of the more, 10 years after Luther, some of the more lucrative men and businessmen in town established a system of water pipes and fountains. One is in Luther's front yard. This is here. These fountains operate with wooden pipes, and many of those wooden pipes from that time are still functioning to this day. The famous insurrectionist Thomas Müntzer was resident in this house. It received recommendation from Luther to become pastor, I think at Milhausen, was it? He becomes the leader of the Peasants' War, where 50,000 peasants end up being slaughtered. And you notice Spalatin up there. Spalatin was secretary to the electors. It's been documented that the electors were really here very rarely at this castle. Frederick the Wise decides to make Wittenberg the capital of electoral Saxony, and he decides to put a university here so he's not sending his students over to his cousins, I think, to ducal Saxony to go to school at Leipzig, and he wants this town built up, so he plans the university, and also the castle receives a lot of attention just around the turn of the century, 1500. These were all bureaucratic offices, so that's why Spalatin lived right here. This whole area, you should know, was destroyed in 1760. This is the north side of town, and the town was bombed from this direction up here, and everything was badly destroyed, especially on the north side. The castle church was heavily destroyed, about probably the roof and up to a third of the way down. What it looked like at Luther's time was lost forever at that point. But here's what it looked like before it was bombed. And you see no Prussian military helmet here. There was a little bridge you had to go over to get to the doors. The original thesis doors were burned in 1760 in this event. It was gutted inside. So what you see now, it's beautiful and there's a lot of Luther in there, but you shouldn't get too weepy about it all. This is the thesis door. It was put in bronze in 1858. Of course, it has Luther's 95 Theses. He posts them in 1517, as Hans just noted. He protests indulgences, and the indulgence trade was coming from couple of different directions. On the one hand, Frederick the Wise had his indulgence collection in here, and I believe, Hans, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those several thousand relics were displayed in what was the gallery or upper balcony of the church. You had all kinds of relics, like the thorn from the crown of Jesus' thorny crowns. That was the key relic. Here's what it looked like at the time of Napoleon. There's the church tower, all the destruction that happened, and a drawbridge and a moat on the outside. Today, if you walk around the city and you see the green spaces, that's where the old moat was. And there's a nice pond right up there, which is a part of the thing that remains. You see how the castle is being reconstructed, which is really nice. They did a bunch of excavation right there and found the old kitchen, and you had all kinds of things like the pig stall and the stables and everything you expect from a medieval court. The Archbishopric of Mainz had become vacant. The royal family wanted to have one of its own on the seat. It was a very significant seat because it was one of the electors of the Holy Roman Empire. The Pope says, well, we can make dispensations for this. What does it take? Millions of dollars. How are you going to raise the millions to pay the Pope for the position? Well, you're going to borrow it. So they borrowed it from the Jewish banking family, the Fugers. How are you going to pay it back? you have to hire a fund developer. You get the best guy available, and his name is Johann Tetzel. And he goes about raising money to pay for that. This was the Elbe door right here, and there were about 10 guard towers around the fortifications. This was the main entrance right here, the Elbe Gate, and here you had right in this area, you had a tower. Through the centuries, there were various volunteers who manned the walls, but I think it probably got more official as time went on.
The Leukorea, the University of Wittenberg. That was founded by Duke Frederick the Wise.
Luther took his theological exam here in 1512. This building was the first building. It was built in 1501, I believe, or 1502. It was here that Luther begins to lecture on the Psalms, Hebrews, as he begins to emerge and come to his convictions about grace, etc. He's also reading St. Augustine intensely, who really leads him into St. Paul more deeply. It's all happening here. This is where the lectures were going on. This is the great institution where all the great Orthodox dogmaticians and Orthodox teachers taught the faith. It's in beautiful shape now. It's been restored maybe 10 years ago or so, and they're very generous with usage, so we have access to it as needed. Melanchthon is the most, aside from Erasmus, but surely the most famous scholar of his generation in Europe. He's carrying on correspondence with everybody, and he's doing it from this house.
Before he lived in a smaller cottage, and he lived here with his Katie. He was also married, Katie Kapp, her name, and they have children too, 4 children. But this family works not so well like Luther's family, and so you can see the pictures from Luther's family, and Melanchthon is sitting by side with a beer mug, and so that happens here.
He dies in this house. A French scholar visited one time and wrote about finding Melanchthon reading a book with one hand and rocking a cradle with the other, one of his children, which he found rather astonishing. He was a real conundrum. By the end of his life, he's writing letters to Calvin and other kind of Reformed friends. He's doubting the sacrament. Even before Luther dies, he writes in his edition of his theological text, he defines the real presence not in the elements, but in the action of the Lord's Supper. He's worried that Luther is ready to blast him before Luther dies. He thinks 1545, he knows Luther's working on another confession dealing with the Lord's Supper. And Luther publishes it, and Melanchthon lets out a big sigh because he wasn't blasted by Luther in this last one. And then, of course, he capitulates with the Wittenberg capitulation, the interims, and you've got 30 plus years of chaos in Lutheranism. A fabulous, fabulous genius and a tragic story at the same time.